So, welcome everybody to our 158th Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar, generously sponsored by the Sports Economics Review. As usual, there's a few administrative things to mention. One is that there are two conference deadlines today that you should not miss. One is the European Sports Economics Association conference due to take place in Rotterdam. You can go to their website and submit, and I'll put the link in the chat. The link is in the email reminder. And likewise, the workshop on sport economics and natural experiments in Zurich, which is in June, and organised by Carl Singleton, Romain Goriot, and Raphael Flett. That deadline is also today, so please do pay attention to those. We're really pleased today that we've got Lingqing Jiang from the University of Essex, and she's presenting Fair Play or Winning Ugly, Risk-Taking Behaviour in Elite Competition Under Different Rules. It'll be slightly different this week because I'm going to be sharing Lingqing's slides, and we'll be going back to the old COVID style. Next slide, please. So I've got your slides open, Lingqing. I'm going to share them, and then and then I'll hand over to you once you can see your own slides, I think. That should be a slide, is that right?
Yes.
Perfect. In which case I will say, folk in the meeting, if others do join and you get that notification to let people in, please do that, because I might not be able to once I've gone into full screen mode. But otherwise, do go ahead with your talk, Lingqing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Thanks for sharing this for me.
Yes,
so I'm Lingqing. I'm from Essex. This is a joint work with Alex, a PhD student of Alessandro, a PhD student of Alex Kruma at the Mold University College, and Pierre, Catherine, and Kate Elke from, they're all my colleagues at Essex. So I'm using a slightly catchy title called Fair Play or Winning Ugly, but that is really about the risk-taking behavior. So I'm just using the title to add some spice to the discussion at the end. So it's about risk-taking behavior in elite competition under different rules. The next, please. So this is the field of our study. It's on 100-meter track. Okay, so we analyzed the decision to start a short distance run. So in this picture, you can see Usain Bolt among some other runners. So he is one of our featured subjects. We will mention him quite a few times in the presentation. So why do we look at the start? The start is an important determinant of the outcome in short distance run, because the running time is short and the difference between winning, so top, and not even placing any position can be measured in millisecond. So on this picture, we can see, well, except for Usain Bolt, who has a very visible leading position, but the rest of the runners, there's really not much to separate them, right? So how could they give them a slight advantage to separate themselves from the rest? Okay, they probably can't beat Usain Bolt, but they can take the number 2 place. So one possibility is to have a quick start. The next, please. However, a quick start is not a risk-free start. A quick start has the risk of being called a false start. So just in one slide, now Usain Bolt is now used as a bad example, right? So on this picture, you can see the one with the red frame is again Usain Bolt, and he made a move while everyone else were still in the ready position. So it is a very clear false start, and that lead to a disqualification right away. Okay, and that happened in the 100-meter final in 2011, the World Championship. So there is a clear trade-off. Waiting for the gun is safe and is fair, but it lowers the performance. while jumping the gun gains performance, but it takes the risk of being disqualified. So in some sense, it is almost like a mirror image of a Dutch auction, where when you make an early bid, it guarantees certainty, but you pay a higher price. And if you wait and make a later bid, you could potentially get a lower price, but you're taking the risk of losing the bid. So we are studying this trade-off or this risk-taking behavior in a highly controlled and incentivized setup with the most experienced individuals. The next one, please. Here is some related literature, and I have to say it is a very small selection. We can relate our study to models to papers that model risk-taking behavior. For example, in the blackjack. So I hope you know what is a blackjack game, card game, and any stopping time models with a minimum waiting time threshold, or as I mentioned before, Dutch auction. There's also some literature in sports, so not really economics, but pure sports literature. They look at the reaction time in short distance run, but either they look at a smaller sample or not such a long time period as we do in the current study. The next one, please. Okay, so now we're using Usain Bolt again. So as I said, in 2011, he made a false start and he was disqualified right away. If he made the same move a few years ago, he could have a chance to restart the race because the rules have changed a couple of times in the past 20 decades. And that presents a natural experiment for us to look at the change in the risk-taking behavior in response to the change of the rules. The next one, please. So here's the natural experiment. The rules have been changed a couple of times in the past 2 decades, and that presents three natural treatments. So the first rule is in action before 2002, where each athlete can make one false start per run. Okay, so for each athlete, the first false start is for free. Okay, only if you make a second false start in the same run, you will be disqualified. So if Usain Bolt made a false start in that period, he could start the race once again. The second rule has a very short life. It is between 2003 and 2009. Under this rule, one false start per heat. So a heat is a group run of 8 athletes. So one false start per heat is permitted, and whoever makes the second false start in the entire heat will be disqualified. So if Usain Bolt was the first one in the heat to make a false start, he could restart the race again. Only the person who makes the second false start, it could be the same person who makes the first false start, or it could be a different person. So the person makes the second false start in the heat will be disqualified under this rule. And Rule 3 is implemented since 2010 until the present. And under this rule, no false start is permitted, the so-called one and done. So any false start will lead to disqualification right away. And that is, so the year where Usain Bolt was disqualified is the first year since this rule is implemented, right? So it's the first World Championship 2011 since this rule is implemented. So the rationale of introducing Rule 3 is to promote fair play. Or in particular, it says to keep slower runners from intentionally jumping the gun. Well, we know that Usain Bolt is probably not the slow runners, but yet he is punished. Next one, please. So here's the setup. Sorry, next one. So here's the timeline of the start of the race, right? So athletes get ready at the command set or time 0. There is a start signal as tilde. It is delivered by a gun, and we assume it follows a memoryless Poisson process in a model. The only decision point is the start of the race, after which the running ability will determine the outcome. Okay, so which we will abstract for the moment. So we do not look at the remainder of the race. We only focus on the start. And at the start, athletes, they decide simultaneously either to jump the gun or to wait for the gun. So this pink note T is the time where you intend to start. Okay, at this time, before the gun, you decide, which is really between 1 or 2 seconds, right? So between 0 and the gun is usually 1 or 2 seconds. It's rarely more than that. So in this very narrow window, you have to decide whether you jump or you wait. And at the time T, when you decide to start, when your brain tells you start, it takes time Ri to react. That is, it takes time for your body to make a first move that is detectable. And that is different for each individual. There is a minimum threshold D, which is set to 100 milliseconds for everyone after the gun, before any movement. So according to the IAAF rule, any movement that is detected before S plus D, that is before you hear the gun and the minimum threshold, so that is the time when you start, when you want to start and your body actually started, if that movement is detected before S plus D, it is a false start. And any movement detected after that is a valid start. The next one, please. Okay, so for those who have questions on why the minimum threshold is set to 100, so in theory, it is actually possible to react within 84 milliseconds, but that is done in a lab, right? And just to illustrate how it works, so here you have the gun, and you hear it in the ear, and then the ear will send the signal to the brain, and then it will travel through your body, your spine, your legs, your feet, and then the device that is numbered 6 will detect the first movement by measuring the change of the pressure. Okay, the next one, please. So any questions so far? Okay, good. So we don't have a model yet, but we will have one. But for today, we will just present some testable hypotheses from the upcoming model. So these are the three hypotheses that we would like to test today. The first one is, so it's all about the starting strategies, right? The first one is that the starting strategies depend on the 4 start rules. So the tendency, we expect the tendency to jump the gun should be the highest in rule 1 and followed by the rule 2, and should be the lowest in rule 3, where a false start will lead to disqualification right away. The second hypothesis is that the starting strategies depend on the objectives. So we look at two different objectives. So some athletes, they just want to win the race. Some athletes, they want to have some place, right? They value the finishing time as well. They may not win, but if they're placed number 4, 5, 6 with a valid finishing time, they're happy. So where athletes, they value finishing time rather than winning, they are more likely to wait for the gun. And the third hypothesis is the starting strategies depend on the starting ability. And we expect athletes with high starting ability, that is those who needs very little time to react to their body, right? So for the body to react to the brain, that is very close to the minimum threshold. So for those athletes, they have high starting ability because it takes no time to react, and they tend to wait for the gun. Whereas those with low starting ability, those who need longer time for the body to make a move, they tend to jump the gun to compensate. The next one, please. Okay, so here's the data. We collect the events of 100-meter from the official website of IAAF from 1997 to 2019. The World Championships take place biannually. The change of rule divided the sample into 3 periods. Okay, the first period is from 1997 to 2001, where Rule 1 was in action. And just to recall, under Rule 1, 1 false start per athlete is permitted. The second period is between 2003 and 2009, where Rule 2 is implemented, and under Rule 2, 1 false start per heat per 8 athletes is permitted. And the current period is between 2011 to 2019. That is the current rule. Under the current rule, no false start is permitted. And just for the terminology, when we refer to an event, say 100-meter in 2011, that consists of multiple rounds. Okay, so the first round is the so-called preliminary, the second round is heat, the third round is semi-final, the last round is final. So semi-final and final, I think is clear, but for those who are not familiar with short distance run, so the earlier rounds are called preliminary and heat. Okay, next one, please. Okay, that's the challenges. Next, please. So what are the challenges we're facing? So in the data, we do not observe two things. Okay, we do not observe athletes' intention or their strategies. So if you think about penalty in football, right, you can observe whether a player shoots left, right, or in the middle. You can also observe the goalkeeper, whether they shoot to the left, right, or they move to the left, right, or they stay in the middle. Same as tennis, you can observe the server where they serve to the wide, to the tee, or to the body, right? So in our setup, in the short distance run, you do not observe the strategy. That is, you do not see whether their brain tell them to jump the gun or to wait for the gun. And that is mainly due to the fact that we do not observe athletes' type, RI. So what do I mean by type? The type is the starting ability that is fixed. Okay, so RI is the time your body needs to make a first detectable movement, right? So that is the genuine reaction time. But in the data, we only observe the so-called recorded reaction time. Okay, so I'm using these two pictures to denote the type, right? One is a fly, so this is the quickest animal in the world. It takes no time to react. So every time you want to catch a fly, it flies away. So you can barely catch it. Other extreme is the sloth, right? Which is, we know how slow it is. So it takes a lot of time until we observe some movement of a sloth. So these are two extreme types, and we do not know if an athlete is by nature a fly or by nature a sloth. So what we observe is the recorded reaction time, and that is, if you look at the timeline of the race, it is the time you intend to start, you decide you should make a move, plus the time that your body makes a move relative to the starting signal. Okay, so it's T plus R minus the time where you hear the gun. So we do not see T, we do not see R, we do not see S. All we observe in the data is all these three in one term. Okay, and they label it as reaction time. So notice that this recorded reaction time is only equal to the genuine reaction time if athletes wait for the gun, right? If they always start T equal to S, so if they always start when they hear the gun, then whatever is recorded is their genuine reaction time. But we know that in reality, most athletes, they try to, if I call it steal the time, they try to steal the time more or less, or a little bit. Some steal more, some steal a bit less, right? But they all try to steal the time a bit. So in the reality, the recorded reaction time is always a bit shorter than the genuine reaction time. Okay, the next one, please. Next one, please. So yes, so here I would like to show you a few scenarios of forced start. So let's first look at scenario one with a very talented athlete. So the type is a fly. That is, this athlete has a very short genuine reaction time, and he decides to jump the gun. Okay, so he decides to make a move before he hears the gun. But because he is so quick, and the first movement is detected before the gun, okay, so the recorded reaction time will be negative, right? Because it's before you hear the gun. So that's a clear false start. The next one, please. Okay, now the second scenario. Someone with a medium genuine reaction time, okay, and also decides to move before the gun, okay? But since the time T plus R prime is before the minimum threshold, right? So it's after the gun, but because it is before the minimum threshold, it is also a false start. Okay, it's not as bad as the previous one, but it's still a false start. Okay, the next one, please. So this is the most interesting scenario, I would say, and that is also probably where Rule 3 is targeted at. So the slow starters, the sloths. Okay, those slow starters, they have a very long reaction time, and someone with a very long reaction time decides to jump the gun. Okay, but because it takes so long to make a first move, the first detected move is after the minimum threshold. Okay, so the recorded reaction time would be above the threshold, and according to the rule, it is a valid start, even though the athlete decided to jump the gun. Okay, so that is really important. So here they intend to jump the gun, but in the reality, it is a valid false start. Sorry, it's a valid start. It's not a false start. Okay, the next, please. So what does this tell us? Not all the intentional cheat or jump the gun are detected and punished, and especially among the low types. So if we only look at the detected false starts, it doesn't give us a full picture of the strategies, right? So some of you may wonder before, why can't we observe the strategy if someone makes a false start? Clearly the person wants to jump. If someone doesn't make a false start, then clearly the person doesn't want to jump. So that is not true, right? Because of especially these scenarios among the low types, the number of false starts doesn't give us a full picture of the strategy. The strategies are not directly observable. The next one, please. Yes, so we will first show some descriptive evidence for the three hypotheses, and then we will present some regression, very preliminary regression analysis. The next one, please. So the first hypothesis, let me remind, is the strategies depend on the false start rules. And we expect the tendency to jump the gun should be the highest under rule 1, where everyone has a free false start, followed by the rule 2, and followed by the rule 3, where nobody is allowed to make any false start. And that's pretty straightforward. Next one, please. So here's the table with all the recorded false start among all athletes. Okay. Is there a question?
Yes. Just one question. In regime 2, when there's only one false start allowed per heat, are you including in the data also? So which heats are you including in the data? Are you including all the data or just the first, the very first heat when there's a blank slate, everybody has sort of, one false start available?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I understand
so if
the question.
Within regime 2, there's a difference between the very first attempt to start the race and the subsequent attempts. Because on the very first attempt to start the race, you do have a false start available, right? People can risk a false start without disqualification. But on the second attempt to start heat, right, after there was a false start, then any false start disqualified you.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question.
So that's an important difference between those two
types.
So
the recorded reaction time is for a completed race. So in the data, we only observe the finishing time or the reaction time for a completed race. So if someone made a false start and restarted the race,
I don't think you understood the question. So in regime 2, there is the first start. You have 8 participants or 9 participants, okay, and something happens, right? In that first start, all 9 participants are allowed to jump the gun. Okay, it doesn't disqualify them, right? You have one attempt where they can jump the gun, and everybody starts at the same race. But so suppose that there is a false start in that first attempt. Okay, in the second attempt, the regime is very different because now any false start disqualifies you, regardless of.
In the second attempt, it becomes rule 3.
Exactly. So I was asking, what is what are you treating as regime 2 in the data? How are you treating that second attempt of regime 2? Is it the same as regime 2, or is it regime 3?
Oh no, that is if you're in the period of where rule 2 is, then it's rule 2.
But in the second attempt, that should be separated from the first attempt.
That's correct. In theory, in the second attempt, it boils down to rule 3. But we are treating, if you're in that period where rule 2 is implemented, then you're under the treatment of rule 2.
Okay, I'm not sure I would do it that way, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, we could try to, yes, if after 1-4 start, we could, yes, they could have an additional treatment that is called rule 3, that we could try it. Yeah, but at the moment, we're labeling.
You're including all of the heats in regime 2. You're treating the same.
Yes, exactly. Just according to the time period.
Okay, got
yes.
it. Right,
thanks for the question. Yes. So this table, we have the sample. We split the sample between men and women, and also we split between the 3 periods, which each corresponds to the rules. And we can see there are more 4 starts per championship under the rule 1 and then rule 2 and rule 3. So there's almost no difference between rule 2 and rule 3, but there is a clear difference between, so under the rule 1, there's a lot more 4 start per championship. And maybe not too surprising that men 4 start more than twice as often as women in our sample. And also you can look at if we look at the average recorded reaction time, it does increase monotonically from rule 1 to rule 2 to rule 3. Next one, please. Well, so the previous one is just some descriptive stats for the hypothesis 1. And the second one, we're now looking at whether how does the strategy depend on the objective, right? Whether you just care about winning the race, being the first, or you also care about having a valid finishing time. Because once you're disqualified, you will not have a valid finishing time. So these are the 2 objectives that we try to distinguish. The next one, please. So again, we do not observe individuals' objective. However, we don't know their objective at the individual level, but we know the fact that earlier rounds, they reflect less value on winning, but more on the finishing time, right? So in the earlier rounds, you just want to advance to the next one. You probably even conserve some energy, but there's nothing to win in the earlier rounds, right? You can win the group, you can win the heat, but there's no medal to win. So compared to the later rounds, the winning objectives becomes relatively more salient, right? So therefore, we can look at the pattern of the recorded reaction time from the earlier rounds to the later rounds in the same event. And to do this exercise, we will restrict the whole sample to finalists, right? So because only the finalists, they go through all the rounds in the same event. The next one, please. Okay, so this is a descriptive figure of the pattern of the average recorded reaction time for all the finalists. That is, for all the athletes that went through all these rounds. And on the left side is the women, on the right side is men. And we can clearly see so on the y-axis is the average reaction time. And we do this for each rules. So we can see the recorded reaction time declines, that is more tendency to jump when the winning objectives gets more salient, right? So when you go towards the final, you're more likely to jump, right? So this is true for men, but not exactly for the women. We can see the lowest average reaction time actually occurs in the semifinal for women. And actually there are some sports literature show that sometimes women's best, they find their best performance in the semifinal rather in the final. I do not have explanation for that, so this is just the evidence that we see. And again, the reaction time increases as the rules gets stricter, right? So we can see rule 1 is on top, then rule 2, and then rule 3. So rule 3, sorry, it's the opposite. The rule 3 is on top, so the highest, and then rule 1 is the lowest. So this is again confirming hypothesis 1, even we now restrict the sample from all athletes to finalists. Okay, next one, please. So the last hypothesis is the most tricky one. It depends, so the strategies depend on the starting ability, right? So we expect athletes with high starting ability tend to wait for the gun, where those who have low starting ability tend to jump the gun. But again, we cannot observe their true type. Okay, the next one, please. So in order to do that, we need to know their individual starting ability and their individual strategy, which we observe neither. So how do we use proxy? So for the first, we used the maximum or the worst recorded reaction time of each finalist in a given event as a proxy for the genuine reaction time. Okay, so if you have a repeated entry, a repeated trial in the same event, right? We look at the worst. So because if you try to jump at some point, it will be only shorter, right? So the longest one or the worst one is the one that is most close to your true ability, because that means you're probably your starting time just coincide with the gun. So the time you intend to start just coincide with the arrival of the gun, right? So any jumping the gun will only shade the time. So we take the maximum reaction time for the starting ability. And for the second individual strategy or individual intention to start, we approximated by looking at individual consistency within each event. So I will explain you what does that mean in the next slide, please. So the idea is to classify athletes into two groups. One is consistent, the other is inconsistent type. So what are the consistent athletes? These are the athletes, they have very small variation in their recorded reaction time across all rounds in the same event. So if they show very little variation in the recorded reaction time, they most likely wait for the gun, right? Because the genuine starting ability is assumed to be fixed. So you are either a very quick one or a slow one, right? And we know that this recorded reaction time corresponds to the genuine reaction time if and only if you wait for the gun. Okay, and for the inconsistent athletes, these are those who display very large variations in the recorded reaction time in the same event. So they most likely to jump the gun at least once, right? Because the gun is stochastic, right? So you can think that the gun is moving and you don't know when it is. So sometimes the gun arrives early. It gives you a large recorded reaction time. And sometimes the gun arrives later. That means you have more time to steal. That gives you a shorter recorded reaction time, or sometimes even a negative reaction time if you move before the gun. If the gun arrives too late, right, and you already make a move, then you will have a negative recorded reaction time. So this is illustrated by those green and red dots, right? So here the green dots for the consistent one, if you let them repeat many times, they do not show many variations because they are waiting for the gun. And those who, have very large variations because they don't know when the gun comes. So sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small, right? So this is how we use the consistency measure to approximate their strategy. Okay, so if you are consistent, you are likely to wait for the gun most of the time. And if you are inconsistent, you are likely to jump the gun at least once at some point. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so to do this exercise, we again have to restrict the observation to events, right? So our observation now is finalists times event, and that is Usain Bolt in 2009 is one observation, and Usain Bolt in 2011 is another observation, right? Because the consistency is based on one event, not each rounds. So again, just to repeat, we classify athletes into two types, the consistent type and the inconsistent type. So we take the range of the maximum recorded reaction time and the minimum recorded reaction time within each finalist, within each event. And then we use an individually scaled cutoff of below 20% of the own average reaction time in each event for the consistency. Okay, that is because every person is a different. You have some have longer legs, some have shorter legs. So for some, the time is short, but it's all relative, right? So that's why we use an individual scaling. So if you are more volatile and it's above or below 20% of your own average, then you're too volatile, right? And this 20% corresponds to 30 millisecond or 1 standard deviation for an average athlete. So here are the figures that we relate the consistency measure that we use as a proxy for the strategy and the starting ability that is measured by the maximum recorded reaction time, right? So on the left is women, on the left is men. And as we can see, those who are consistent, okay, they display on average significantly shorter genuine reaction time. And those who are inconsistent, they have a longer genuine reaction time. And that is true for both women and men under all three rules. Okay, so that again confirms our hypothesis 3, that those who have a shorter genuine reaction time, so who have a high starting ability, they tend to wait. And here on the right-hand side, in the last block, you can see that's again Usain Bolt. He is an outlier, but just in year 2011. Okay, so he kind of messed up the analysis a little bit. Okay, next one, please. Yes, now the regression analysis. So we have seen the descriptive evidence, and now we will present the regression analysis. So the first result regarding the rules, as we can see here, we have the OLS with the dependent variable is recorded reaction time. We control for the rules and the stages. So we can see the rule 2 significantly decreases the tendency to jump the gun for women. So it increases the reaction time for 6 milliseconds, but not for men. And for rule 3 significantly decreases the tendency to jump the gun for both women and men, but more for women, that is 18 milliseconds more in the reaction time and 9 milliseconds more for men in the entire sample. The next one, please. Okay, so the next result is regarding the objectives. So here we have a stage dummy, which is final versus the rest, because only in the final there is the winning objective is the most salient. And this, we only include finalists as observations. So among the finalists, oh, sorry, there's a question. Sorry.
Yeah, Jorge has a question.
Please.
Hi, how are you doing?
Hello.
I have a question. I mean, from what I read about Usain Bolt, he had an issue, I don't know, an issue, that he was very low, not in reaction time, I don't know about that, but in the first 10 meters, because he was big or something like that. So I'm wondering if the decision, whether I cheat or whether I, try to jump or not the gun, depends on how I perform structurally in those first 10 meters, and that would, that would kind of matter a lot. I believe in how I decide whether rule 1, rule 2, and rule 3, of course. And then because you talked about ability in the reaction time. I mean, shouldn't you include kind of a runner fixed effect or something like that too? Because assuming that since you run for 5-10 years, something like your kind of reaction time is the same, maybe that's inherited or something like that. So I believe you should include a runner's fixed effect to control for that, right?
Yes, thanks for the question. So the first one, you actually mentioned the running ability, right? So the first 10 meters. So first is we for the moment we are abstracting the running ability. We only look at the starting ability, and also we do not, as far as I know, we do not have data for 10 meter, 50 meter speed. So in swimming, you have intermediate time for each lap, right? But for running, especially for short distance running, you do not have time for every 10 or 50 meter. So we could not look at that question. But of course, it's, as you said, the running ability, or the running ability in particular, the first or the beginning, is, of course, will affect your decision, your strategy. And the second question regarding the athlete fixed effect, yes, so the thing is, we're looking at the world championship, right? So that's actually, at the moment, we only have data on the world championship, which happens every once every 2 years. And we do have some athletes who have a long career that they show up 2-3 times in the data, but for the majority of the athletes, if we look at the whole sample, all athletes, sometimes they only show up once or twice, those lower level athletes. For Bolt, yes, we observe him in each championship. So the next thing we want to do is we want to collect some lower level events, but more frequent. Then when they, like the diamond series, then we can include the athlete's fixed effects, because we can observe 15 times per year in the diamond series. But now if we include the athlete fixed effects, we're losing a lot of variation for those who only show up once in the data. Sorry, did I answer the question?
Yeah. Thank you. I guess
Okay.
you're still building this. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question, Alex?
Yeah, thank you. Just maybe I missed it. Did you cluster here standard errors? Because these are...
No, it's not clustered yet.
But we have 8 per hit or per event. So I believe makes sense to cluster them, right?
Yes, we could do that. So today I mean, it's very last minutes that we actually just finished the results before before the presentation. It's very preliminary results. We will refine the results. And yeah, thanks for this suggestion.
And another question, well, it refers in a way to what Danielle asked. I looked at the tournament design and it have changed pretty much between the years that you have in your data. So for example, in 2000, 2004, 2008, there were 2 semifinals and top 4 qualify to the final. Starting from 2012, which is the final rule, the last regime, you have 3 semifinals with 2 best advance directly to the final and best 2 times advance to the final. So actually, this could have affected their strategy of whether to run faster. You see, so it's not really so. For example, before the change, with 4 top people that advance, this clearly affects whether the risk taking.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yes, so the qualification criteria is a bit mixed, right? As you said, it's sometimes it's placement qualification, sometimes it's timed qualification, and sometimes it's a combination. As you said, the best 2 and then plus the best among the rest. So yeah, and also this kind of perfectly correlate with the year, right? So we are now including the rules, which already is determined by the year. And then if they happen exactly the same time as the change of the tournament design, then I'm not sure if we can additionally control for that. But I mean, could you maybe suggest something that we could
well, I don't know. There are 2 things that happen simultaneously, and then each of them could have affected. So either one affect and the other does not affect, or they both affect, or so it's very difficult to disentangle which one affects the result.
Yes, definitely. So as you said, 2 things happen at the same time, and at the moment we kind of attribute all the changes to the change of the rules. But yeah, it could also be partially due to the change of the advancing the qualification criteria. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks. Well, we need to notice this. Of course, that's a caveat. Thanks. Okay, if I may continue.
Yep, I think so.
Yes, so the second results, so this is regarding the objective. So being in the final, where the winning objective is most salient, that significantly increases the tendency to jump the gun, but only for men. So it decreases the recorded reaction time by 6 milliseconds, but not for women, as we know that the women find their best performance actually in the semifinal, which I do not have an explanation for that. Okay, the next one, please. So this is the last result regarding the starting ability about our third hypothesis. So here we include the starting ability that is measured by the maximum recorded reaction time in millisecond. And this is a logit specification, and the coefficients are the average marginal effect. So notice that the higher the maximum recorded time, the lower the starting ability, right? And for the finalists, so that's why we see the negative sign. So the lower the starting ability, the more likely to be inconsistent at the start. Okay, so that is to jump the gun at some point in the event. Okay, the next one, please. So here I will conclude after the regression analysis. So here's is the summary of our results. The first set of results on the false start rules is supported. On average, the recorded reaction time increases monotonically from the rule 1 to rule 2 to rule 3. And the second set of results on objectives is also supported. On average, the recorded reaction time declines within when the winning objective becomes more salient. So we compare the early stage versus the final stage dummy. The last set of results on hypothesis 3 is also supported. Athletes with lower starting ability tend to jump the gun as they display inconsistency at the start. And we also notice some gender differences. So as the next step, we hope to finish the theoretical model, and we hope to collect more data from lower level but more frequent events, such as the diamond series, so that we can have repeated performance from the same athletes so we can measure their starting ability more accurately. So finally, some discussion whether you think the current rule is the best rule, is a fair rule, and any ideas, suggestions, critiques, comments, all welcome. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Lingqing. That was a really interesting talk, and we have plenty of time for questions and comments. And I saw Jorge's hand went up, so Jorge, please do.
Sorry again. I find this really interesting.
Thank you.
Well, I don't think it's fair, rule number 3, but we can talk about fairness. But my question is, thinking about Usain Bolt, and everyone knows or knew that he wasn't very good at the start. But if you're in the semi-final or maybe in the final and you actually think you can beat the guy, you may have more, you will become more risky. So I'm wondering if the data shows an increase in running or starting before the gun sound when a big star, like when you're facing a big star that because you said there are two types of runners, right? Ones that you kind of want to win, and the other that want to improve their time. But if you really want to win or be the superstar or the star of your heat, maybe you really push it to the limit. So is there kind of some evidence in the data showing that when Usain Bolt or one of these guys is on your track on a final, there's going to be more so it kind of outweighed with the fact that when you're running a final, your reaction time goes down. So that would be really interesting to actually see something like that, if the data shows something like that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, very good suggestion. So I think, yes, we should have a indicator of superstar in the heat, and see if that affects the results. Yes, so yeah, there in other sports we've seen, like in tennis, the players they may be intimidated when they see a superstar in the draw, or they may be extra motivated. So that's a very good, yes, we will check that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Jorge, any more questions and comments? Alex.
So you motivated it with the Dutch auction, right? But in Dutch auction, I don't remember there is a punishment or disqualification. So there is the higher cost that you pay, but here the cost is kind of if you disqualify that's it, you're out. So I'm not sure they are really equivalent, those examples. So if you wanted to impose here or to use the Dutch auction as a model, I'm not sure they are really.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, indeed, there is no disqualification in the Dutch auction. I'm using it as a as an example, just to show it's kind of just for the weighting, right? So whether you choose to weight or not to weight, it's kind of a mirror image, because if you weight, you may lose. Well, in some sense, it's like you're out, right? You're not disqualified, but you're kind of out of the bid. But I agree, it's not of course, not an accurate example, but just as a motivating.
I mean, in a Dutch auction, you have it's a winner takes all, right? And only one winner. And here you have like 3 medals, for example. But I have another last point. So you have data from 1997 to 2019. What's the reason to start with 97? Because you have like 4 years the first model, 6 years the second like regime, and 8 years the third one. Because you have data before 1997.
That's a good question. So it's not by choice. So I think there is something has changed in the middle, that either the data format, it was slightly different. So we decided for the most information that is available from 1997 on. So the earlier, same for the Diamond League, I think, exactly 1997 and 1998, something has changed, and there are different websites and different information. So it is not we of course want to have a very balanced one, but the rule 2, for example, is in the middle, right? So from 2003 to 2009, has a very short life. So ideally we should have the equal number of years for each rules, but yeah, that's we don't. Yeah. But if we could collect more lower level events, then we hope we can balance a bit more. Yeah. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Alex. Any more questions and comments? I wanted to ask as a clarification as much as anything. With that last, I can go back to the slide, can't I? Because it's my computer.
You can decide which slide.
With this one, when you got their ability based on their worst recorded time, does that mean that the time could have happened, towards the end of the sample, say? So some of the observations of that you're running the regression on are before that worst recorded time. Is that correct, or?
I'm not sure if I understand question, but we look at the worst time at any stage of the event, and most of the time, as we can see, it happens in the early stage, right?
Oh, so it's within the event that you get the worst time.
It's then within the event, yes.
Okay.
So we treat one event as one observation, and we see 4 repeated entry in one event, and we take the slowest reaction time, most likely in the early stage, because there's not much stake and they don't have to push too much, and that we use as their true starting ability for this event. Because in our data, the gap is 2 years from each event, so many things can happen. And there's research also show that the reaction time actually is affected by age. So many things, or training, right? So within 2 years, with some training, or you can improve, or maybe you're getting older, it will be worse. So we don't know, many things can happen. That's why, again, it requires more frequent events.
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to ask you was kind of just out of interest was, are you able to see a height effect? You mentioned how the signal goes to the brain and goes down to the feet. Do you have the height of the athletes, and can you tell if that reaction time is longer for taller athletes relative to shorter athletes?
Yeah, we really should have included the height. Yes, so that's a good point. So at the moment, again, so this is very preliminary results. And when we're trying to add controls, because we have some missing values, still some missing values in the data, we're losing some observations. So I'm reluctant to lose observations. So there's a trade-off, right? If I want to add more controls, I'm losing more. So to date, the results are really with minimum set of controls. So with the maximum observation that we can have. But later on, when we are adding more controls, we will lose quite a few observations. But yes, definitely the height is a very important factor for the reaction time, and we should have at least one specification to include that. Yeah, thanks.
Now, I guess finally, country fixed effects, is that the country that the athlete's from or the country the event takes place in?
That is the origin of the athletes. It's not the event.
Yeah. Any other questions and comments that people have? I shall unshare so that I can perhaps see better. Doesn't appear so. So in which case, thank you, Lingqing. That was a really interesting talk, and look forward to how your research develops on the project. As others have said, really, really interesting data, really interesting setting to look at. So very much looking forward to seeing how your work develops. We will meet again next Friday. We'll have Dave Berry from the Southern Utah University presenting No One Gets Paid What They Are Worth, exploring player value in the early history of professional basketball. And just as we wrap up today, don't forget those two conference deadlines, submission deadlines that are today. And I wish you all a fantastic weekend. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for all the comments and suggestions. Really happy to hear that. Thank you.